In this lesson, we're going to enter the territory of networking. So far, we implemented the layout of the product screen, but the data is of course hard-coded in the app. So that's not what we want. We want this data to come from the internet. And that's why we're going to fetch the data from the server. Android apps communicate with the internet using client-server architecture. So client being the app, and server being a server in a data center. Servers have an interface called API, which is short for Application Programming Interface. This API is what our client, our app, talks to. And this communication typically happens via HTTPS protocol. So our app needs an API, and that's why we have an API called FigStore API. It's just built for this small course and has one endpoint, very simple. If you pass a product ID, it gives you the data for that product. So let's try it out. Yes, this is the data of product ID number 1. And as you see, this is exactly the hard-coded text that we have right now in the app. And if I, for example, try number 2, we get another product. And disclaimer, there are only 5 products. So after number 5, you will just get error. This data format that you see, this is called JSON, which is commonly used for data exchange. So how do we start using this API in our app? We will start by modeling this data. So we will create a class that mirrors this data structure that we get in the JSON file. So let's create a class called product. And to be a bit organized, I'm going to create a package called data model and put this product in a data model. So in Kotlin, it's very easy to make a class mirror a data model. So I'm going to delete the brackets and define the variables directly in the constructor like this. So for example, for ID, we can define val ID, and ID is a whole number. So we can see it doesn't have fractions, it's like 1, 2, 3. That's in Kotlin an integer. Integer is a data format representing whole numbers. So that's ID. And then for title, we have this data format, string. String represents sequences of characters like this. And then we have price, which is not a whole number. So we cannot use integer for price. For that, we have something called float. So float represents floating point numbers, which means they have a fractional part like this. And also this one. For description, category, and image is very easy. I'm going to just use the same string, just like the title. So let's rename this one to description, category, and image. And for rating, as you see, it has some nested values. So this is when we're going to create another class for the rating itself. So we have rate, which is a float, and count, which is integer. So I'm going to copy and copy and paste. And then we can define the rating as a nested class. So that's it. This product now mirrors this data format. So how to fetch this data now? There are many libraries which implement the client part of the client-server architecture. And one of them, which is a very modern one, is called Ktor. Ktor is specifically for Kotlin, which makes it really handy to use in an Android app. So we're going to add a new dependency to our project. So we go to the version catalogs, which is here, and add one new version I'm going to use Ktor version 3.03 and then add the definitions here. So Ktor has multiple definitions. So it's unfortunately not as simple as just one liner like coil. So I'm going to copy and paste the definitions just for the sake of time. Very briefly, the first one is the core functionality of Ktor. And Ktor uses an underlying engine for the network request, which is called OKHTTP. And then these two, content negotiation and JSON, they are used to converting JSON data format into Kotlin objects, which is in our case the product class. So as you see, each of them have definition of module, which is the combined version of group and name. You can also define dependencies like this. So one more step, I still need to add them here. As you see, I don't get the code completion, but that's because I haven't synced, so the changes from the version catalog are not synchronized yet. So I sync one time, and then I can add them like this. I need to sync one more time to be able to use the Ktor in the Kotlin codes. Now I'm going to create a class as a helper for this API. Again, to be organized, I'm going to create a new package called network. And then in the network, I'm going to create a class called fake store API. This will make sense later why we create a separate class for it. But for now, let's just continue like this. So how Ktor works is that we need to initialize a client object first. And then we pass it an OKHTTP object. OKHTTP, as we said, is the engine that Ktor relies on. So now we have the client, but one thing is missing. By default, this doesn't use these two for converting JSON into Kotlin objects. So for that, we need a content negotiator. And the way Ktor works is like this. We need to install the content negotiation. And to use the JSON, I import it, and you can see now all of those dependencies are used. I'm going to make it private, and I'm going to define the base URL as well. So what we have here, I'm going to copy it. Now we want to call an endpoint. In Ktor, this is how it works. So first I'm going to create a function in this class and I call it getProduct. And we need to pass the ID, of course. ID, which we said is an integer. And now we can call client.get because this endpoint is a get endpoint. And here we need to build a string. So in Kotlin, one of the ways to build a string is like this. I want to use the base URL. So to refer to this variable, I can do it with $. Now I can say base URL / products and /. So I'm referring now to this argument. And at the end, .json. So that's how this API is. And then one more step, which is calling the body. This is how we can cast the response to our product class. Like this. We're getting some errors. For now, don't worry about them. It's about suspend function missing, but we will cover it later. And now if I change the return type of this function to product, you can see we can return this result of this API call. But in Kotlin, we can also do it in an easier way, which is like this. And then we can even remove this one because we are defining the product here. So we're almost there, but there is just one performance problem with this class. So every time that the fake store API gets initialized, the client will also be initialized. So we will have a new client every time this class is initialized. And Ktor client is expensive to create because of resources that it uses, for example, connection pools. And that's why we want to create it only one time in the whole app, no matter how many times the API class is initialized. So I'm going to extract this client from the class into an object. And what is an object? In Kotlin, object is a single instance, so it's a singleton. This means there will be only one instance of this type in the whole app. And that's what we want in this case. However, I do need to now make this public and make a variable for it. And I'm going to move this Ktor client to its own file. Nice. So that's it for integrating the API. So right now, of course, this class is unused and we have an error here, but we will take care of it later. We will resolve the error and use this class in the next lessons. And with that being said, the key takeaway of this lesson is that Android apps communicate with the internet using client-server architecture. And that's typically through HTTPS protocol. And Ktor is a modern framework for building clients and servers, and it's made for Kotlin. And so the action item is to integrate the API.